Announcements by His Honour the Speaker.
Minutes of Monday, the 5th of June, 2018, and Tuesday, the June 11th, 2018.
No.
I beg to move that the minutes be taken as read with one amendment in relation to the member for St. Michael North having been present at the last sitting of Parliament, sir, and having spoke as well.
The budgetary, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the budgetary proposals, there's an omission in relation to the fact that I spoke during that debate. That is not noted. I spoke, in fact, between the Honourable Member for St. Michael South East and the Honourable Member for St. Andrew, but that is not reflected in the minutes. Is there?
It was lost in transcription.
Sir? It was
It was lost in the transcription.
Okay, I just wanted to draw it to the attention of
Yes.
It was either forgettable or unforgettable. Second.
Move that.
The minutes be approved as amended.
If there are no other corrections or observations, let those minutes be confirmed.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General, petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that standing orders number 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the deals aforementioned standing order be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Who's going to?
Government business is now the order of the day.
A minute, sir. A minute. That's okay. This number two. Number 4. Strong, he's the leading member for St. Michael. Strong, he's a member for the... No, yeah, you know, but he's a member for who? Member for which constituency? You don't call that? Okay. Okay. Order number 2. This order is in the name of the Prime Minister, Honourable Miss Emma Motley, but it has been assigned to the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Honourable Ranstron, and the order is to move the second reading of the Barbados Revenue Authority Amendment Bill 2018.
The honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill will seek to amend the Barbados Revenue Authority Act of 2014 to repeal the system for the issuance of tax clearance certificates and for related matters. Now, Mr. Speaker, in the administration of tax matters in any country, it is important that one seeks to balance the need for the collection of revenue with respect to the ability of the country to maintain a level of growth and tax certainty with respect to economic agents. And so having seen the impact of the provisions under this Barbados Revenue Authority Act, what it would have had on the economy over the past 2 to 3 years, it is certainly the considered view of the government of today that it represents a hindrance to growth, and therefore it represents a hindrance to the ability of the Revenue Authority to be able to collect taxes in this country. Now, whilst the imposition of the provisions in this act did have some improvement with respect to compliance, what it actually did was to bring to a almost complete halt the ability of financial transactions to be executed at a time when the country needed everything put in place to encourage growth. And so therefore, having consulted with a wide cross-section of stakeholders with respect to the impact of the provisions under the Land Tax Act of Cap 78, the Liquor Licenses Act Cap 182, as well as the Property Transfer Tax Act of Cap 84A, we now come here this morning to make sure that we can remove those restrictions which would allow businesses across the country to be able to transact business in a way that is fair and consistent with good governance. We certainly believe that under the previous administration, there was a call for businesses to hold strain. And so to the extent that a number of businesses across the country heeded the call of government, that at a time when making those business decisions in the interest not just of the employees, but certainly in the interest of the shareholders of such businesses, that as the economy deteriorated, certainly over the last 10 years, that some of these very businesses that wanted to ensure that persons were not sent home, because it was the call of the government of the day, that you cannot then turn around and impose restrictions with respect to tax clearance when businesses were through their actions seeking to improve the welfare and well-being of workers across this country. And so whilst it is no excuse, Mr. Speaker, for any business to not be able to meet their statutory obligations, as a government, we believe that it will be irresponsible to ask business people in the country to hold strain with the government and then turn around and penalize the businesses because they try to work with the government. And so a lot of the unintended consequences of what took place, certainly in the last 5 years, as a result of the goodwill that many businesses would have extended, trying to work in concert with government to maintain a level of employment across the country, then we do not believe that it is right and proper to be able then to restrict their trade at a time when we need this economy to start growing again. And so whether as a large business, a small business, a rum shop, a vendor, we believe that at this particular point in time in Barbados's history, and certainly what is required to move this economy forward, that as part of our drive to improve business facilitation in the country, and you've heard the Prime Minister make last week in her budgetary presentation that this government shall move very swiftly on to the growth measures for the economy, that this really is the start of the government responding to the facilitation of business in Barbados, And it is in that frame that we want to come here this morning to discuss and to certainly repeal and amend these specific measures that have hindered the conduct of business across this country. And so, as you will see, and certainly as the people of Barbados will see through you, Mr. Speaker, that this government means business when it comes to our ability not just to pronounce policy, but certainly be able to bring the appropriate legislation that brings any policy announcement into reality. And so, as we move forward as a government, certainly as we seek to bring order to the public finances of Barbados, I really do want to impress upon the public through you, Mr. Speaker, that in order to return good governance to the public finances and certainly to the government as a whole, that the people and the members of this chamber must act and do things that are consistent with being able to deliver such. And I really want to thank the Honourable Attorney General for mobilizing his staff to be able to, having announced that we are going to make these amendments, that we have the appropriate legislation available today to be able to debate in this chamber the reasons for those amendments, such that it will actually bring into effect the policy announcements which have been made so far by this government. Because the people of this country, Mr. Speaker, would have heard a lot of things in the past being pronounced and announced, but there simply was no follow-up with the appropriate legislation to be able to bring these measures into effect. And so we feel fundamentally that it is important that the government sets the tone for the return of confidence in this economy. And so this is just one small part of us being able to do the people's business with respect to provide a sense of relative certainty with respect to tax matters in this country. But certainly in a process as we seek to reinvigorate this economy, that people don't feel as if the Revenue Authority is hounding them down for taxes. And so the approach that we shall undertake for revenue collection will be considerably different from that of the previous administration. And so in the context of what we are trying to mobilize resources across this country, Mr. Speaker, the people of this country must, certainly from the Ministry of Finance's point of view, must see an improvement in the delivery of public services such that the revenues that are in taxes, revenues through taxes, which either business people or individual are asked to pay, that is a commensurate delivery of services consistent with those revenues. And so, in that broad context, Mr. Speaker, this bill, as I mentioned, is only just one part of that business facilitation ethos that this government intends to undertake to unlock growth in this economy. And so therefore, where there is a lack of clarity, the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment shall provide that clarity to the public of Barbados. The government certainly is moving with haste to make sure that any policy that is announced, and the Attorney General can attest to that, that we are working to make sure that the appropriate legislation is brought to the people, brought to this Parliament, debated, such that policy announcements can come into effect. So that the business of government can now be conducted in a manner that is consistent with what the people of Barbados would have grown accustomed to prior to the last administration. Mr. Speaker, this particular amendment will bring some ease to a wide cross-section of businesses in Barbados. And at the very time where we are now going to be focusing very strictly on making sure that we can return a level of growth to this country that people have not experienced for some time, it is important that from a revenue collection standpoint, that the public will feel confident that the tax authority in this country will behave in a manner that is consistent with being able to facilitate growth. And as we move forward with the engagement, certainly of the various tax authorities, the engagement with the various stakeholders in this Barbados economy, that it is through consultation that the government shall act in the interests of Barbadians. And so these amendments today, as you can clearly see, range from simple shopkeepers, whether in your constituency, Mr. Speaker, across the length and breadth of this country, that people need not fear that their ability to support their livelihoods will be threatened simply because of a matter which, for all intents and purposes, only creates administrative chaos, not just within the revenue system, but certainly for thousands of businesses across this country. And at the very time that every single community, every single business in this country is now expecting to see from its government a level of engagement, a level of service, we believe that these amendments certainly are fit for purpose that allows all businesses, no matter where they are, to enter into their arrangements, certainly with the Revenue Authority going forward, knowing that the arrangements that we put in place will be honored. And the Prime Minister has already spoken to some of those arrangements to be put in place. And it is through these engagements with the various business sectors and segments, Mr. Speaker, that greater clarity will be brought with respect to how the Revenue Authority expects to engage with business in this country. What it also does, Mr. Speaker, is that there are individuals who, for whatever reason, may find themselves in a situation where they may need to dispose of a piece of land, that may find it difficult to be able to do that simply because of the circumstances of the economy, such that they are not able to sufficiently pay the taxes given the penalties and interests that has already been accrued to them for various reasons. And so therefore, throughout this process, not just to amend this piece of legislation, but there are measures now being developed that will seek to ease the burden on taxpayers of this country. And certainly in the fullness of time, the Parliament will be brought up to speed with respect to the finalization of such measures. But for all intents and purposes, Mr. Speaker, this government has to be pragmatic with the way that we manage the affairs of the country, and we have to be pragmatic with the manner and the resources that we have available to us with respect to the various revenue authorities in this country. And so whilst we've committed to ensuring that there is certainty with respect to the Revenue Authority, as we are seeking to do in this case, there are other avenues for revenue collection, Mr. Speaker, that the government is currently undertaking to make sure that the citizens of this country, that the businesses of this country can conduct their business without fear that the Revenue Authority or Customs or any other agency of government is intending to do them harm. And so what we are seeking to start this morning, Mr. Speaker, is just to bring greater clarity and, in a sense, greater confidence to the people of this country that, one, business facilitation will be top of the agenda for this government, but the government will not seek to penalize those taxpayers who, in good faith, worked with the previous administration, only then to be left behind by the introduction of what could only be described as draconian measures to recoup the very revenue that the government's policies themselves created the problem in the first place. And so as we seek to restore a level of order to the public finances, the engagement of the public will be one of our primary considerations, because whilst we expect that taxes obviously have to be paid, the arrangements that we put in place for taxes to be paid, Mr. Speaker, and as I mentioned to you, the provision of public services, we now must make sure as a government that people start to believe that it is worth paying their taxes. And whilst taxes are an obligation that one cannot get out of, the reality is that for the conduct of the previous administration in the affairs for taxes would have created what we would call in Barbados a bad taste in people's mouths, Mr. Speaker, and would have led to a kind of behavior that once it takes root is difficult to dislodge. And so therefore, as we move over the next few weeks and months to restore a level of confidence in this country through some of the budgetary measures introduced last week that will give business people, give the ordinary citizen the confidence that the tax administration of the country is actually working in their interest. And that is important as we move to ensure that we utilize not just smart technology and big data techniques, as we will call it in the industry. There are ways to collect revenue without penalizing those who are already compliant. And so the amendments that we've brought to this Honourable House this morning is just the first step of this government's approach to revenue collection and the administration of taxes in this country. Mr. Speaker, having consulted widely on this issue, it is the view of government that the tax policy must be consistent with your growth strategy, must be consistent with your, at the widest possible view, with your broad public policy framework. And so given that everything that happens in this economy will at some point be connected not just with the Revenue Authority, but certainly with the ability of government to be able to provide the appropriate level of public goods and services. The administration of tax and the implementation of these policies must be perceived, one, to be fair and efficient, such that the incidence of taxation and the incidents with, to whom these policies may apply, that we in government must provide a sense of certainty that any tax or any policy that is being implemented is fair. And to the extent that it is certainly our view that having asked people to hold strain through very tough times, and many businesses did, and tried to work with the previous administration, that it is completely unfair, Mr. Speaker, to then impose restrictions on their trade at a time when the economy now needs every bit of investment, every bit of growth that we need to move forward. Mr. Speaker, as a professional economist, there's no explanation that I can put to this House as to try to even explain the motives of the previous administration with respect to these measures. But as I mentioned to you earlier, public policy must be consistent in its broadest frame, of which tax policy is a part of the broader public policy framework. And certainly as a lead revenue collecting agency in the country, the manner in which we treat to taxpayers is just as important as the revenues being collected and the spending of government thereafter. And so to the extent that we are working very hard, not just to change the image of the Revenue Authority, but certainly the interaction between the Revenue Authority and the individual constituents, if I may use that term, is equally important going forward. Because it is the trust of the economic agents that they can act in good faith with government. And certainly this government has provided a level of engagement which I believe is very encouraging, which in the context of the social partnership, Mr. Speaker, we are seeking to move to a point where the trust is rebuilt and that the engagement with the Revenue Authority is on a basis of respect, one, equality, but certainly from the perspective that the obligation of taxpayers to the government to make sure that they are up to date and the management of any arrears that may be due to the Revenue Authority, that is under serious consideration, Mr. Speaker, because the way that we manage our affairs through this crisis, I believe, will define the overall economic recovery and transformation that the Prime Minister spoke about in her budget statement last week. Because as Barbadians, you know, Mr. Speaker, that our culture is a very important part of our psyche. And if at any point in time we don't feel comfortable with something, we will make it known. And it is in that same thought process that we now must revisit the way that our tax authorities, but certainly not just in the context of this bill, tax authorities, but the way that government in general interface with the public, because we are at a stage in this country where every citizen must feel that any interaction that they have with any government agency, whether they're tax authority, in the case of the Revenue Authority in this bill, or any public service being sought by the citizen, that they feel a sense that they are being treated fairly, that they're getting value for money for whatever service they may be getting from government or good. And so along that vein, what you're going to see over the coming months certainly will be a frontal engagement by this government to be able to facilitate the business of individuals, facilitate the business of commercial entities in this country, facilitate the interests of investors, both domestic and foreign, such that the engagement in Barbados will send a clear message, Mr. Speaker, that Barbados is again open for business for all. Mr. Speaker, taxes, and I fear I may be encroaching on the second order of business, but they're all connected, because taxes, whilst being an obligation, Mr. Speaker, must be accompanied by representation. And what the people of Barbados would have experienced over the last 10 years was a slew of taxes without any real representation of their interests, and that has manifested itself into the state of the quality of services that the government is now seeking to offer to the public. And so it is important that, as I mentioned earlier, once you announce policy, you must have the appropriate legislation to back that policy so it comes into effect. But certainly as a government, the provision of those services must be commensurate with the level of taxation. And so as members of this honorable chamber, we also have a responsibility to make sure that the interests of Barbadians at large are represented in this chamber and elsewhere, so that, as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, people feel a sense that it is worth paying their fair share of taxes. The manner in which we collect those taxes is equally important as the manner in which we spend the revenues that come to the government. And so therefore, our focus as a government is to ensure that at every juncture, Mr. Speaker, that we're able to represent the interests of Barbadians, the length and breadth of this country, but whilst being able to provide a level of public service that the people have grown accustomed to. And this is something that I shall reiterate, the length and breadth of this country, Mr. Speaker, because we have all grown up in the Barbados where we've seen real progress. We have seen improvements in the delivery of public services in all of our lifetimes. But certainly, the last 10 years was not a manifestation of that. And so therefore, it is the responsibility of this government to restore that trust that the people would have had in the government before, such that whether it is tax administration, whether it is social policy, whether it is economic policy, whether it is infrastructure policy, that the people of this country feel a sense of confidence that their interests are looked after. And I cannot stress how important that is, because in order for us to be able to bring some order to the public finances of Barbados, Mr. Speaker, it is that trust, that confidence, which we cannot, it is intangible, but it is that trust that allows a government to be able to operate, because once people know and feel that the interests are being looked after, then the administration of tax would operate at such a level that persons no longer perceive measures to be draconian, but they go about their business knowing that when they make a profit, they will pay their fair share, they will get a level of service that's commensurate with the taxes being levied, and confidence returns to the economy. Mr. Speaker, this amendment is an important one at this particular juncture in this country. And as we move forward to restore a level of confidence in this economy and to improve on that, we feel that business facilitation will be a critical component of reinvigorating this Barbados economy. And just let me make it clear, Mr. Speaker, that business facilitation is not defined by commercial focus only. It is the ability of ordinary Barbadians in their personal capacity or in their work life or in their own business interests to be able to conduct whatever business that they have to conduct, certainly with the government of Barbados, but certainly in the context of the private sector as well, that now becomes the focal point through which this economic recovery and transformation will be delivered for the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, with those few comments, I wish to say to the Parliament and the people of Barbados that the Ministry of Finance, certainly over the next few months, will be engaged in serious consultations, not just with the various ministries, but certainly with the stakeholders within the private sector, within the context of the social partnership, to ensure that what we bring to the country is fit for purpose, such that the confidence that people used to have in their government can be returned. And it is important that instances like these, Mr. Speaker, that we start to shape the mindsets of Barbadians again. Doing right by the people, Mr. Speaker, is the art of business for government. And so, therefore, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the bill be read a second time. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And I just crave your indulgence for a couple of minutes, even though I did not actually, Mr. Speaker, ask to speak at this time. But clearly, our growth aspirations as a country demand that we release the impediments to business operating in Barbados, whether that business is the source of local product or product or service for export. We have to release those impediments to business in order to facilitate growth. And if we reflect on the past 10 years, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central did in his presentation, one of the things that can be said without dispute is that there was not a significant enough effort being placed on growth strategies and growth aspirations in the Barbados economy, and that the burdensome regime of taxation created further impediment to the viability of businesses, both small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and of course the businesses of larger companies. A government worth its salt and which wants to respond to the legitimate mandate given to it of the people must, as swiftly as is practicable, redress issues in its way, in the people's way, and address the problems facing the country in terms of those impediments to its economy. But business facilitation has been one of the things given much lip service in Barbados. I have heard that, and I think that it is the twin mischief of that slogan which has come out of the tourism sector. Tourism is our business, let's play our part. That's the appeal to all, but yet the environment has not been created within which all could feel like he or she has a part. So I'm simply saying that I would want to accord some credit to the government today for swiftly moving to repeal this particular measure, because in repealing that, you are facilitating business, going beyond the practice of paying lip service to the business of business facilitation. One recalls well the former Minister for Industry, Commerce, former representative for St. James South. That was perhaps his mantra. He's not now in this honourable chamber, and I would imagine that the honourable member who now succeeds him in that portfolio, as well as the honourable member who last spoke, will in fact continue this, that which they have begun today, in going beyond the matter of lip service when it comes to business facilitation. But while we release the impediments confronting business in Barbados in an effort to spur growth, both in the domestic market as well as in terms of our foreign thrust, I believe also that we have to pay careful attention, that the government should pay careful attention to the business of the avoidance of tax obligations by a delinquent few in Barbados. Now, the advice I have, the information which has come to me thus far, and I'm in opposition to investigate this with the thoroughness which would be at the disposal of the government. But certainly my understanding is that when it comes to the avoidance of tax obligations, there are a delinquent few, notoriously delinquent few in the business community of Barbados who believe that they have a right to conduct themselves in the way that they do. So that while the government moves with haste today to repeal this measure in an effort to facilitate business and to provide an environment in which growth can be spurred, I believe the government should see it equally as its responsibility to look into that mischief. And we're not talking about inability to honor your tax obligations. We're talking about the mischief of delinquency with respect to honoring your tax obligations. And I would urge the Minister of State and the Minister of Finance, the Honourable Member of Christchurch East Central, to really look together with those at the Barbados Revenue Authority to clearly identify who those delinquent few might be and to see what can be done to bring them to heel. With that, I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
In supporting the proposed amendment, sir, and giving reference to the emphasis which my colleague from the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central placed on the business community, I want to speak first to those who may fear that we are not doing our duty and due diligence with respect to the matter of tax leakage and compliance. I want to make reference to the budgetary proposals which were passed in this House, in which the Honourable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance made it clear that this government is serious about making sure that it receives all revenues due and owing in order to carry out the business of government, but also to make sure that the people of Barbados are on an even playing field, that there are not those who are made to pay and those who are not so pursued. So I want to make it clear and re-emphasize the point that was made by the Honourable Prime Minister, that in phase 3 of the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan, we planned by that phase as a government to have a comprehensive report on tax policy reform such that we are able to see clearly and move to address any issues of leakage and non-compliance across the various sectors in Barbados. So I want to make it clear to those who may be listening that this government is not bringing this particular proposed amendment in order to let pass people who should be paying their taxes. We are very serious about making sure that the laws of this land are complied with. But I also want to flag and to remind us of the impact that the bill as it stood before these amendments had on business in Barbados, but not only on business in Barbados, but also on households and regular people. What we saw at the time the previous measure was introduced, such that one could not carry out any transaction on a property without having a tax clearance certificate showing that taxes had been paid in respect of land tax, value-added tax, corporation tax, etc. We saw a complete standstill with respect to real estate transactions and related transactions at a time when the country could ill afford for any further inertia in its economy or in its society. We saw panic by homeowners landowners in the country and abroad. We saw that people who were seeking to invest in this country in order to generate the growth and the business activity that we needed were asked to stop, were told that rather than facilitating what you are attempting to do, we are actually going to make your lives more difficult, and we're actually going to make it the previous government so that we will put every barrier possible in your way to stop you from bringing to these shores the revenue that we so desperately needed. I want to re-emphasize as well the part of the Barbados Labour Party manifesto, which I believe has been made a document of this House, that lays out for the people of Barbados how is it that we as a government intend to go about making decisions. Because one would have gotten the impression over the last 10 years of the prior administration that the business of making legislation and developing policy was simply about how you could patch a hole. And certainly as a member for St. Michael South Central, who often has to pass Flagstaff Road, I am all too familiar with those policies of simply trying to patch a hole and failing miserably. And I believe the Honourable Member for Christchurch West will be able to bring some resolution to that issue. But I want to say that we have to consider certain questions, and these were laid out first in the Covenant of Hope and then in the manifesto. In looking at how we develop policy, it has to make sense. And so we have to ask, what is the public interest that the government must seek to protect? What is the public mischief against which the government must guard? And what are the social justice goals and issues which the government must take into account? Legislation has to make sense. It has to make sense to the people of the country. It has to make sense for those doing business. And we have to be able to, and I am convinced that this current government is so able, we have to be able to be creative in such a way that we do not put a stranglehold in seeking to take the revenues and seeking to make sure that we are able to bring about the change and carry on the business of government. We have to make sure that we are not placing a stranglehold around business, and we are not placing a stranglehold around regular Barbadians. And that is what the previous act prior to this amendment was doing. It brought a halt to all real estate transactions. Beyond that, like many of the tax measures that we have seen from the last administration, it was also insufficient. It was also the result of insufficient consultation with the stakeholders, for example, with the Bar Association, with real estate agencies and companies. It did not have the benefit of that consultation, such that once it was passed, those stakeholders had no clue about how to proceed. It caused great panic to ensue in the sector, and it meant that people had to stop transactions that were worth millions of dollars in revenue to this country and were not clear how to proceed. And so these amendments, Mr. Speaker, sir, are necessary and important to bring some clarity and some predictability to the business of government. I also want to say that in looking at how the measures that we bring address social justice issues, we have to understand that we are dealing with people. And we're dealing with people who, for 10 years, have had very little prospect of being able to participate in the economy because it was an economy that was shrinking. It saw people being laid off from work. It saw people's businesses being closed. And so it is quite unreasonable in that environment to further place on people's backs the burden of not being able to move from where they are, because even though they may want to comply, they find themselves less able to do so. And it's for that reason, Mr. Speaker, sir, that you saw the measure that was brought in the budgetary proposals by the Honourable Prime Minister, which said that this government will waive all interest and penalties payable on income tax, land tax, corporation tax, and value-added tax that is owing to the Barbados Revenue Authority for the years 2000 to 2016 on the condition that applicants have made arrangements with BRA by December 31st, 2018. Of course, it also stipulates that failure to meet the conditions that were agreed with BRA means that those interest and penalties will become owing again. But I remind this House of that provision to show that there are ways in which you can work with people, and in fact that you should work with people in order to assist and facilitate their desire to be compliant. Because when you have a situation where people find themselves less able to comply because of the economic conditions that have been wrought by the last Democratic Labour Party administration, it is then unfair to place those further burdens on them. I firmly believe, Mr. Speaker, sir, that Barbadians want to pay their taxes. In the majority, Barbadians are compliant people. And so it is up to us as a government to ensure that we are able to facilitate that compliance. But I want to move quickly, sir, away for a minute from the business sector and to look at the effect that this previous measure would have had on regular people and households. We know that in Barbados, often people are not cash rich. They do not have lots of assets in working class Barbados, but they may have a piece of property that was left by a grandfather or a great-grandmother that they have earmarked to be able to help them send their children to school or to be able to invest further in a family business, a shop, or a farm. And what the previous bill, sir, did in requiring a tax compliance certificate for any transaction was that those people were now no longer able to be able to move, to shift that piece of property in order to do other things. It meant that they were stuck with the asset because they may not have been able to be compliant across all of the various taxes that were owed and due and owing, sorry. And so what we saw, certainly in St. Michael, was people who had pending transactions, first of all, to be able to send their children to university, because you will recall, Mr. Speaker, sir, that they are now operating in an environment where they are now being made to pay $5,000, $7,500 and up in order for their children to go to the University of the West Indies. And so now, being placed in that position, now deciding, well, let me see if I can get rid of this property that we've had in the family for years to see if I can get some cash to send my children to university, are now being told, well, hold on, you have to make sure that you are compliant in all these other areas. And so we have to look, Mr. Speaker, sir, at what is the public mischief, but beyond that, what are the social justice issues? We do not want people to be in a position where they have small assets, the only assets that they may possess that are of no use to them. And that is what the previous BRA Act of 2014 would have done, and that is what made this amendment, as brought by the Honourable Member for Christchurch Essential, so important. In my final brief comments, Mr. Speaker, before I close, I want to emphasize that this Barbados Labour Party government is very much in tune to the need for growth, both on the fiscal and on the non-fiscal side, both through measures that we introduce as part of the budget, but also through legislative and other types of arrangements that we have the power and have the buy-in of the country to bring. So, for example, we know that there are certain things that have been hindering growth. And when I talk about growth, I'm not just talking about large companies. I want us to understand that in 2018 now, growth in this country has to be led by regular people. Barbadians have to be able to participate and drive growth and be able to see the benefits from it. And that is why the part of the act that spoke to not being able to get or renew a liquor license for a small shop, for example, if you do not have the tax clearance certificate, was also an oppressive measure. But it is also why, Mr. Speaker, we have looked, and we will continue to look, at all of the bureaucracies for the sake of bureaucracy that have plagued regular people in trying to carry out their regular business, in trying to establish companies. The Honourable Prime Minister has said in the past few days that we will undertake and are undertaking a review of town and country planning legislation to make sure that that the legislation does not operate in a way that dampens the growth of the various sectors in which we are trying to generate growth and economic activity. I want to make it clear, Mr. Speaker, sir, through you to the people of Barbados, that this Barbados Labour Party government has a plan for growth and development in this country. And that we understand that it is not just large injections of capital and large foreign direct investment that will make growth happen. That, for example, through the trust loans that we have introduced, that we will be able to ensure that regular Barbadians who might own barbershops, who might make leather bags, are able to find the wherewithal and the resources to invest in their companies and be the ones at the front of the charge to lead growth and development in this country. We, as a Barbados Labour Party government, sir, plan to undo what has become the consolidation of wealth in the hands of the very few that was led by the last Democratic Labour Party administration, and make sure that we see equality and fairness reintroduced to the way that we do business in this country when it comes to people's growth and development. I want to say finally, sir, that transparency and communication are important, as we have seen. They can make a big difference to the level of confidence that people feel in the economy. And so this Barbados Labour Party government has made it clear, and this may seem like a small measure, but I believe that it is a very important one and sends the correct signals, that we will establish an electronic dashboard for those projects, those investment projects, whether public and in some cases private, as appropriate, that have potentially such a large contribution to make to the economy and to the well-being of Barbadians that they would want to know how those projects are being implemented, whether there are any delays, whether the projects are on track to being completed. We have seen what happens in an economy where there is no information or there is no visibility with respect to what is happening with large capital projects, for example, in the tourism sector, as we saw, or with large public investment projects that people have an interest in seeing come to completion. And so that electronic dashboard, sir, will in the first instance be made available for those public officers who have an interest or who are working on the project. But it is part of eventually the thrust of this administration, of this government, to improve the clarity and the transparency, to let Barbadians know that there are no secrets when it comes to concerns that matter to them. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to end by expressing my support for these amendments and for re-emphasizing that these are important not just to the growth of the economy, but to the well-being of ordinary Barbadians. I thank you, sir.
The honourable member for St. George North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my support to this important bill before the House today. It's important because, Mr. Speaker, we recognized from the outset that the government is on a path to not only undo, as the member for St. Michael South Central said, but also to bring clarity to business in this country. And I want to underscore some of the points, one of the points that she made in her presentation. She said that the government is prepared to work with citizens and allow them to be compliant. And I think that in itself is the hallmark of what a good government is out to do. And of course, this brings me to the point that over the past 10 years, we saw, and of course the member who introduced the bill, the member for Christchurch East Central, made the point that, you know, we need to facilitate business and confidence must return to our country. And I want to say that over the past 10 years, we have seen a situation where the former Democratic Labour Party government did whatever it was possible to stop business in this country. And I used to call them the Zacchaeus. I don't know how many of you remember Zacchaeus from Bible days when Jesus told him to come down. And the reason why Jesus told him to come down, not that he was physically in a tree, but that he used to have the taxes very high. And it was synonymous. No, you see, the Bible is used in a parable. So parabolically, yes, a tree, and Jesus told him to come down. Tax is too high. And therefore, I am of the view, Mr. Speaker, that we have seen the last government pitch all the taxes at a rate where people were unable to pay. And the whole idea of the tax clearance certificate, as the members pointed out, where you had to produce a tax clearance certificate in order to sell land, in order to property and so on, was indeed a hard one, and people found it very difficult to do business in this country. And I remember members on our side spoke to the need to unlock this whole situation. And in this country, things were very hard, not only for persons who had property, land, and were doing business, but also for those small shopkeepers. I recall shopkeepers, the liquor license went from $120, Mr. Speaker, to $500 to $1,000. Professional fees for lawyers was triple. Professional fees for doctors and engineers, undertakers were triple. And therefore, the whole question of unlocking business was very hard for everyone in this country. And this government has just came to office and have issued the type of sentiment that we want to hear in this country, that business must be returned, and returned in a way, Mr. Speaker, that it is more progressive than before. I want to say that we have to set confidence, as the member said, there was a time, and historically speaking, and the point that she made, that we want Barbadians to be compliant, because Barbadians have always been compliant. It was the poor people in this country who paid taxes out of production. And many persons paid small taxes out of the production of pears. My grandmother, for example, used to raise pears and vegetables and so on in order to pay her taxes in October. October was the time when people paid taxes. But the taxes were small. And whenever you have taxes small, people pay. If taxes are too high, which is we know is a retrogressive step, people do not pay. And we have seen a situation that despite the government keeps bringing taxes upon taxes, the collection seems to be lower and lower. And therefore, we have to return this country to a situation where taxes are low and that people become more compliant. But how do you get people compliant? And I thought the member could have explained how do you get people compliant in a situation where the economy is shrinking. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that, and I hope that I will hear what training methods are being used by the Ministry of Finance to train personnel to collect taxes. There are still too many people who read the book, How to Avoid Taxes. Remember, there are literatures in the world how to avoid taxes, and people avoid taxes. And who avoid taxes? Is it the poor? Is it the rich? Is it the middle class? There are many people in this country and the countries around the world, Mr. Speaker, and some people might not want to hear that, how to avoid taxes. People read this book and digest it every day, and not only this, there are schools who teach people how to avoid taxes. And we have to be able to train our personnel how to avoid taxes. I believe, I am not saying which class of people would avoid taxes, but we know that there are many people in societies today who avoid taxes because they have the wherewithal and they have the methods and they have the personnel and the staff to avoid taxes. And we hope that our people are trained in order to think. So I believe that the ministry must involve a training program, because quite often I heard in this chamber over the last 10 years, the same people that work with you are working with us. I heard that. I heard from the last government over and over again, well, there's no bit different. They're the same people that worked with you up to 2007. They're now working with us. But look, within, of course, of less than 20 days, we were able to bring a measure to undo what the government put in place around 2014. Is it the same government, the people, sorry? Or is it the policy? I believe it's a policy. We have set a policy in our manifestos, and of course, it was referred to the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party, and of course, the Covenant of Hope, which said that we will do this in order to get business moving again. And it is important, therefore, for us to look at a low tax regime and, of course, a progressive tax system that will ensure that persons who have wealth, persons who have a property and income pay according to what they earn. But how do we do that? Because all taxes are on income. Taxes are on profit, taxes are on salaries, taxes are on the income generated from interest and so on. And we need to be able to encourage people to produce. We need to encourage persons in this country, businesses, to grow and to make wealth. I think one of the things that I noticed in the last administration, and I want to caution this administration, is this: people must be able to grow their businesses. People must be able to make money in an economy. And one of the fundamental points about the Barbados Labour Party government up to between 76 and 2000 was that we want to put money in people's pocket. How do we do that? Through a low tax regime, through ensuring that people pay money and pay the taxes on time and give them time to pay. I believe there was a time in Barbados, historically, Mr. Speaker, when persons were able to pay their taxes in installment. And I have made the point because I believe there are a lot of people who cannot pay all at once. There are a lot of people who will pay based on their earnings. And the Ministry of Finance must allow people and businesses to pay and work with them. I like that phrase. How do you work with citizens to ensure that they pay according to the earn? There are many people, Mr. Speaker, who will want to go to the Ministry of Finance or the BRA and say, look, I can only pay $100 a month. Can that be allowed? And that's what we want to hear from the Ministry of Finance. Allow people to work with them. You may have a poor person who has just sold some fruits, some vegetables, who have got a little, some money, and they want to pay some. We must be able to allow people to come in. People must not fear, and that's why I use the phrase Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, people were fearful of Zacchaeus, even though the member for St. Joseph does not understand the Bible teaching. That is the other Attorney General, who is a product of the Christian community. And I'm saying to these people that this whole question of fear must not be part of our society. People must not fear. People fear taxes. And the member who introduced this bill must understand that there's a fear of people for pain. But we must bring that fear out and allow people to pay in small installments. Allow people to pay as they earn. Allow people to come to the BRA and say, look, we want help. Now, the whole question of business and business facilitation is important. There are many persons who shy away from Barbados, and many youngsters. I have heard many young people, Mr. Speaker, who said to me, I want to leave this society. I got a few professionals who said to me, I am scared. There are many young lawyers and doctors who want to remain in Barbados, but because the system is so slow. And I can speak about one area, and of course, I know the learned Attorney General has looked at ways to improve the justice system. But the justice system in Barbados has ground to a halt. And during the last campaign, many persons come to me, lawyers, say, we can't make anything. Why? Because the system, you can't get a judgment. You can't get anything within the judgment system. And therefore, that is something that we need to deal with immediately. Just like how we're doing this system today, we have to deal with it. There are many people want to remain in Barbados. But in order to remain in Barbados, we have to be able to put things right. We have to undo 10 years of hardship. And when I talk about hardship, I mean real hardship that people went through. Many businesses went under. Many houses went under. It was a period in which I would say that people could not, the ordinary citizens were not able to live as Barbadians in their own society. We have to be able to undo that. I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, that having said all this though, having said all of this, we have to be able to encourage people to pay. And I said installment just now. But there are people who meet me in my constituency and want to know, even though things were hard in the last 10 years, they're still relying on their income tax return. What is happening to that? I want to find out if people are going to, because the last government owed people up to 2014. Many people have not been paid. And we heard over and over again in the last administration that we will be paid this September, October. Dates were set. Many people have not got their income tax return for a long time. What is happening to that? And of course, the VAT returns as well. Now, VAT in itself is a little kettle of fish, which we have to deal with. There are many businesses in my constituency and in Barbados as a whole who say to me that the VAT, you pay your VAT up front, but you can't get the returns after many years. And I want to say that we need to again put a system in place where persons, businesses especially, who must pay their VAT and who have to wait 1, 2, and 3 years. I believe that the Ministry of Finance and the Facilitation Unit can call in some of these people and say, look, we know we owe you. We know it is something that we have to pay. Can we pay you a piece now and a piece next day? Because you don't have the money. But at least call in the people and say to them, we know that we owe you. Let us try and make an arrangement how we can pay. Because government has to do that as well. Not only take installments in your taxes, but also arrange to pay. There are also, I remember a couple of years ago, we were given, when the country went through financial problems up to between 1991 and 1994, people were getting bonds in lieu of cash. So the government must also look at that, how you allow people to get some form of certificate so that you know that you have money in the future for you or your children. But many people are not satisfied that they cannot hear anything from BAR as regards to their VAT returns. And it's a big problem that I hope that can be addressed. The other one is the reverse tax credit as well. That has been tampered with on numerous occasions. The Barbados Labour Party had it at $1,300 as a reverse tax credit for those persons who do not make the income, and that was in itself a good tax. Not a tax, or sort of avenue to help. It was not a tax, but it was an avenue to help those persons who were not earning. And we hope that we can look at that, because there are still a number of persons in this society who do not work for money, but who need some help. And we need to look at that. I think it was, the last government had cut it in half, about $600 or $700 or so. I think it is now less than the $1,300 that we set in 2007. We need to look at that as well. Reverse tax credit as a means of helping the poorest persons in our society. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the government must be applauded for what they have started to do. They need to look at those professional fees, as I said before. They need to look at the various training of workers, and of course to put a system in place that is clear and that persons will know that we are there to do business. I think the word must go forth from this house that the Barbados Labour Party intends to set it right, and we are not coming here to do political grandstanding, but we're here to set the system in place to ensure that all Barbadians, regardless of status, that they can do business in this country, and that it is here to encourage new businesses and, of course, investment. Investment is the key to this country. We need people to start not only look at investment in terms of a new economy, but we need to see people get back into investing in agriculture, investing into keeping their lands clean. This country is in a mess. All across Barbados, people are, Mr. Speaker, allowing their land to run into grass and monkeys all over the place. We need to start cultivating, and we want to send a signal to those landlords, large landowners, that in order to keep your land into cultivation, and government is giving you a break, you need to be able to cultivate it in a way that you produce crops and that you return this country to buoyancy once again. I believe that once we send a signal, because I know, especially in areas like St. Thomas and St. John, Mr. Speaker, large parcel of land, large acreage of land, are now under coverage and all the like of this, and this is really bothersome to people. And of course, the MTW now have to go and read the hedgerows of people's land. We need to be able to do something. And I have a lot to say about that eventually when we come to look at land resolution and we come to look at those things. But we have to return this country, and I'm glad that the system has started, and I will support those measures. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
The Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. giving me an opportunity to make my short contribution to this debate. First, let me say that I want to give kudos to all the members who've contributed to the debate so far. Not so much the member for St. George North or the member for the Leader Opposition, because we've heard them many, many times in this House. And we expect them to speak at the highest level that they've contributed in this debate so far. But I am particularly impressed with the member for St. Michael South Central and the member for Christchurch East Central, both who are the second youngest and third youngest members in this Parliament, and who have attributed and made such a significant contribution to this debate in one of the first contributions. And all I can tell the people of Barbados is, you are in safe hands with those members on the Barbados Labour Party side. And I have no doubt that they will continue to grow and continue to strengthen and make significant contributions to this House as we go through this 5-year term, indeed, and beyond. Mr. Speaker, the honourable members, and I speak again to the two second youngest and third youngest members, spoke to this measure really as the regulator and as the technical person who would have had a great input in this matter. And of course, I would expect that because it is in their particular ministries. I want to speak to this as a user of the facility. And the reason I have an opportunity to speak to it as a user is because in my previous life, I guess, I've been a small developer. I've developed a few projects and sold them and so on, so I can speak to it as a user. But I first want to break it down about what this and the impact that having required people to have a tax clearance certificate had on people. First, let me make it clear. Some people would think that this was a measure that impacted only on people who had land or who had a house that they could sell or so on and so forth. That's not true, Mr. Speaker. This measure had an impact on the masons, the carpenters, the painters, the troll-plastic people, the electricians, the plumbers, and all down the line of people who construct houses and work in the construction industry in this country. Because if you are unable to purchase that piece of land, or to sell that piece of land and use that income to do repairs on your house, on your other house, then you cannot employ the mason, the carpenter, the electrician, the plumber, the painter, and all of those people. And those are people who suffered tremendously under the previous administration, because the previous administration dampened construction in this country significantly, to the point that masons were having to work as laborers because they could not get a job to lay a block, because painters were having to go and retool themselves as well diggers, or to work washing cars, because they could not get jobs because the construction industry was dampened to the point that they were unable to find a job. Well, I remember clearly when I was on the other side, and the former member for St. Lucie, he was sitting somewhere down there, and got up in this honourable House and said, well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that the masons can't find a job, because we could now pay them what we want to pay them rather than paying them $120 a day. He wanted to pay them $80, $90, and $70 a day. Until I had to tell him, well, you want to take advantage of people that cannot help themselves? Well, it was ridiculous for him to even suggest that in this honourable House, that because they can't find a job, he could depress the amount of salary that you pay the persons per day, taking advantage of people because they couldn't find employment. The former member for St. Lucie, Mr. Speaker, that's what he did. The honourable member for St. Thomas would remember it well, because after I got up and made it clear that he wanted to take advantage of the people, he had to sit down and could never speak again in the rest of that debate, because he recognized that he had misspoken, that you could not take advantage of people just like that. So I want the people of Barbados to understand that this measure is not only about people who might have a piece of land or have a house to sell. This also affects all of the people working in the construction industry, as we call it, down the stream, down the revenue stream, because all of those people would have suffered when this measure was brought into place. And a lot of people suffered. You heard the honourable members say that transactions were brought to a halt. And let me go further. It was a measure that was brought in on the vendor, which meant that the vendor had to show that he had paid all of his taxes. But you know what the banks did? The bank said, those who went for a mortgage said, we are going to extend it to the purchaser, which meant that the vendor had to show a tax clearance certificate, and in many instances, once the purchaser was going for a mortgage, the purchaser had to get a tax clearance certificate too. And why? And I understand why the banks did it. The banks did it that the purchasers needed a tax clearance certificate too, because if they ever had to come and sell that person's house after the purchaser had purchased it, you would have to have a tax clearance certificate for the purchaser then. So it affected not only the vendor, but also the purchaser. And it brought undue hardship on people. And let me explain to you why. I'll give you an example, Mr. Speaker. Say, for instance, your grandmother had a property. And that property was passed to 2 or 3 children. But as you know happens in Barbados, they're unable to go and get the will probated for whatever reason. They cannot agree as to how this piece of land is going to be divided. They pass away, but there's only 1 grandchild. So now all of the property falls to the grandchild. But how does the grandchild now go and show and get a tax clearance certificate for her grandmother 40 years ago? How? Or how does she show the tax clearance certificate for the grandmother, which would have then fallen possibly to the children, and then to her? How does the grandchild show that nexus of tax clearance certificate? So the person is stuck. Not to mention, if they can show it, the cost of the accountant, the cost of going and doing all the searches, the cost of then getting the legal representation to be able to facilitate the matter. Well, by the time they do that, that eat up any profits that would have gotten from the land in the first place. So it was a ridiculous measure. Absolutely and completely ridiculous. And I understand why the people of Barbados decided to go the route of what I will now call the Bajan Revolution, when they put the Democratic Labour Party out of this house altogether, because it could be none other than a complete revolution to turn this country around and to make the people of Barbados understand that we had to have a new direction in this country. And that has fallen to the Barbados Labour Party. And I am happy and I am proud that the Barbados Labour Party has seen it fit to come on I guess this is our 2nd working day, 3rd working day, if we don't count the throne speech day. If we count the throne speech day, it's the 3rd working day. To bring to book our manifesto pledge that we will be repealing this measure. And I support this measure wholeheartedly, because I can see how this will unlock economic activity throughout this country. I can see how we will be getting people working again. I can see how we can get transfers and mortgages being done again. I can see how we can get masons and carpenters and painters and tilers and electricians and plumbers and all those people, gardeners, all those people who work in the construction industry working again, just by unlocking this measure and giving these people a chance to make an honest living. So I support these measures wholeheartedly, because it is an opportunity to bring back confidence in this country, so people can feel confident in themselves and bring back hope and restore the dream that they can make a living in this country. So this is an excellent measure, and I support it. And the people of Christchurch West, I have no doubt, look forward to getting to work again and getting their transactions done in a good and timely fashion. And I hope and expect that this matter will get through this Honourable House quickly, not only this chamber, but the other place as well, and be assented to, and we will see the end of this draconian measure which has brought hardship on the people of this country, and we'll see an increase and an enhancement in transactions and put the people of Barbados back to work again. One other point that I want to make it clear, and sorry, Attorney General, is this idea of no taxation without representation. And this is a slogan that became popular really in the 1700s during the American Revolution. And it is clear that the previous administration taxed this country to the hilt without giving appropriate and proper representation to the people. And not only did they not give representation, but in many instances there was also no consultation with the people. And I, again, would like this Honourable House to note that this Barbados Labour Party administration is making every effort to consult at every step of the way with all the stakeholders who these matters affect. And this is in stark contrast to the previous administration. And therefore, I salute the members for Christchurch East Central and the member for St. Michael South Central, because never again should we see these taxation measures without appropriate representation. Honourable members, I'm obliged.
The Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, the opportunity to speak in this particular debate is one that I do not think I could reasonably pass up. Many people, they say, come to the wedding, but not many people are present at the divorce. I have, I suppose, the regret that I was present when these amendments were first passed into law and became wedded to the sinking of the Barbadian ship. I am honored, though, to be present at the time when we say farewell to these amendments to the BRA legislation. I think, Mr. Speaker, that evidence of a government losing its way is most often seen when the measures that are implemented by a particular administration are so focused on a particular result that they pay no consideration at all to the potential fallout to the society. And at the time when the amendments were made to the various pieces of legislation, and it would do the chamber well, I believe, sir, to note that there were about 4 pieces of legislation: changed the Excise Tax Act, the Land Tax Certificate Act. I think there was part of it included the NIS and so on. But it would do members of the chamber well to remember that at the time when these amendments were first passed, it represented the then government of Barbados being involved in a further desperate tax grab. The government was so desperate for revenue that I don't know how they came up with it, sir, but it was reminiscent of the tax certificate that you had to get in order to be able to leave Trinidad in the 1980s. It was reminiscent of that. But somehow or another, the last administration felt that the way to achieve getting full participation by members of the public in paying their taxes was to impose a regime which prohibited you from doing your orderly business unless you paid those taxes. I remember speaking fervently against the amendment when it was first moved in this chamber. But of course, the then government, the Democratic Labour Party, was resolute, as they were in all things, and pressed ahead with it, notwithstanding the many pitfalls that we, then on the opposition side, pointed out to them. And sir, it wasn't that we did not make a good case against it, because I believe the Bar Association joined in the fight against it, and I am quite sure that they instituted a legal action against the Crown. So strong was their resistance to it. But resolute as they were, the government went ahead and put this piece of legislation in place in the hope that the strictures that they imposed on people would encourage people to pay their taxes. The very opposite happened. And so instead of achieving the salutary aim of encouraging people to participate in our democracy by supporting it financially, it caused a lot of people, sir, to try to find other means of getting what they needed to do done. I am aware, Mr. Speaker, of individuals who needed to borrow money so as to be able to finance their children's university education. I can't imagine a more noble thing for any parent to want to do, financing their children's university education. But those children had to come back to Barbados because the parents could not secure the necessary tax clearance certificate so as to be able to get the mortgage done. So our government felt that securing payments of tax at all costs was supposed to be their paramount responsibility, rather than facilitating the achievement of our people's dreams. But doesn't that sound familiar, Mr. Speaker? Is that not exactly the kind of Democratic Labour Party that this country has seen in the last 10 years? Where the aspirations and the dreams of people came second, third, fourth, and sometimes last on the list, so long as they were able to get their smash and grab approaches to governance in place. Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation was ill-conceived from the start. It was doomed to fail. It imposed unnecessary costs and waste of resources, not just on the average Barbadian, but also on the financial institutions that serve our country, and those costs were eventually passed on to Barbadians. There are people who want, I mean, it is heartbreaking, Mr. Speaker, when a motor mechanic, and I'm talking about experiences from my own practice. A motor mechanic sees an opportunity to buy a piece of land, but he needs to borrow money from the bank. But in order to do the mortgage, the member for Christchurch West just spoke, he had to get a land tax a BRA tax clearance certificate. And he didn't mind, because he knew that he was in default and had not been filing tax returns. Probably hadn't even paid his appropriate share of taxes. But he could not even get off of the mat. He couldn't get anywhere. So he had to let the land go. He had to let the land go. Now, sir, we don't understand sometimes we don't understand how the decisions that we make as a government will affect people, but I am happy to see that we have a team on this side and on that side. All of that side. The entire chamber, happily, that recognizes that being in government only means something if we are intending to take away the harsh and negative things about people's lives and introduce positives, sir. Mr. Speaker, this amendment bill will see many people being able to free up the resources that they have harnessed over the years. No, sir, there's no excuse for Barbadians not paying taxes. So don't let's go down that road at all. But what we have to determine is what is the most effective way of causing Barbadians to pay taxes. But by putting this stricture in place, it has proven not to be effective, and in fact, it has been a damper on the economy. So instead of taking us further ahead, you're actually moving us further backwards. Mr. Speaker, the Barbados Revenue Authority has the ability to record judgments for taxes against individuals by simply presenting a memorandum at the High Court Registry. So if they determine that you or I, Mr. Speaker, owe X dollars or Y dollars, all they have to do is to prepare a memo, no more than 4 or 5 lines. The essence of it is that I hereby certify that John Brown owes the government $10,000 in taxes. They take it to the registry, court registry, file it without paying a penny, and immediately there is a judgment registered against you, the taxpayer who is in default. Now, you cannot want a simpler mechanism for trying to get people to pay their fair share of taxes. And, sir, this has been a provision of the Income Tax Act from the very day that it started. I don't remember when it was enacted, but I assume somewhere in the early 70s or perhaps even before. It has been a provision that has been there from day one. Now, what excuse does the BRA have for not using it? What excuse? Now, sir, when once you register a judgment, there are methods of enforcing that judgment. These are things that some of us in this chamber do on a daily basis. It is not impossible. It is not impossible. So I would urge the minister in the Ministry of Finance to have a discussion with the BRA about how they can use the law to try to go after taxes. Try to go after the people who pay taxes. There are individuals who do not pay, and they can be identified. They can be identified. You sort of know them, sir, by the cars that they drive. That's a good place to start. That's a good place to start, and the houses that they live in, and the kind of lifestyle they enjoy. Mr. Speaker, every single Barbadian who is gainfully employed, as long as they're successful, they have to pay their way. And it is not hard for the BRA to find out. When I was a young lawyer, Mr. Speaker, I got the shock of my life when my secretary told me, Mr. Marshall, a lady out here from NAS to see you. Well, I thought that she was coming to get some work done. The shock came when she sat down and said, Mr. Marshall, we've come to see whether you've been paying your NAS or not. Well, happily, that was the case. But the point is that the same way the NAS officer could walk into my office, they could also have walked into a mechanic or a hairdresser or a restaurant or a bar or a shop and inquire as to whether the individual is registered. Why cannot the BRA do that? Now, we know it's a voluntary system, but we pay officers taxpayers' money, the very taxpayers' money that they're trying to collect. And I can see no reason why the BRA can't have an outreach program. You don't want to frighten people. You don't want to terrorize people. In fact, many of the individuals who they will capture are individuals who will not have to pay much in the way of taxes anyway. Very little, in fact. But the BRA needs to get up and go out. Barbados, these are all Barbadians who work at the BRA. Get up and go out, go through our districts and discover who are the people engaged in businesses. Is that not what happens with the statistical department? Don't they go and interview the mechanics and the shopkeepers and all those things? I don't understand, sir, why we as a government have traditionally operated on the basis of not just departments, sir, but compartments. Compartments that are so airtight and watertight and pressurized that information that is garnered by one compartment of government somehow or another cannot be accessed by another compartment of government. If the statistical department is able to gather statistics on how many businesses there are in Barbados, how many small businesses there are in Barbados, I can't see why that information is not available to the BRA. And then by all means, go there and collect your taxes. Every single company that is incorporated in Barbados, sir, ought routinely to be issued with a tax number by the BRA. But you know what happens? The company is incorporated, and you get around to filing for a tax number when you feel like doing so. Now, sir, if an individual is incorporated, a company that does no business, then the tax number doesn't prejudice you in any way. You just have an ill return. I believe that the finance minds on the other side of this side are working it through. You just file a nil return so that you haven't lost anything. But from the day you begin to engage in business, file your taxes, file your tax returns, and pay the taxes that are due. So, sir, I at the same time then that I am pleased that we are getting rid of this repressive and draconian mechanism, it is appropriate for us, recognizing that Barbados is in difficult financial straits, it's appropriate for us to acknowledge that we all have to help shoulder this burden. We on this side may be aiding in that particular recovery process through our day-to-day efforts as cabinet ministers and through paying our own taxes, but everybody has a stake in this. And you know, we could do the emotional crying thing, please beg and you know, come and help, but we don't need to do that. We have the mechanisms in place that will allow us to capture our taxpayers. I firmly believe that it is not difficult. We need to stop compartmentalizing government and treating information as belonging to one department and you can't get it. That is a sure way of wasting resources. Sir, I remember, and I mentioned Trinidad, I think the clerks at the table, one of them at least will have a recollection, and some of the members on this side. When we went down to law school, we were told that before you could leave Trinidad to come back home, you had to go and apply for a tax certificate. Could not present yourself at the airport unless you had it. And we wondered why. And it was because, Mr. Speaker, we discovered that there was a high level of non-compliance among Trinidad taxpayers. And the Minister of Finance in those days recognized that if you're making money and not paying taxes, there's a good chance that at some point in time you can be headed to PRCO. And therefore, he would catch you that way. Well, sir, eventually they began to recognize that it wasn't serving any useful purpose, and that all it did was to stymie legitimate business enterprise, and they got rid of it. From the moment this amendment bill was passed 2 or so years ago, we vowed then to get rid of it. In October of last year at our annual conference, we gave the people of Barbados the assurance that we would be getting rid of it. And like the many promises that we have made and intend to keep, sir, this is another one of them. Barbados can now look forward to a more practical working environment. Banks can now go back to operating with some degree of certainty and predictability. A financial institution no longer has to worry about having to track down whether or not I paid taxes, if they should have to sell up my property because I've not paid the mortgage. I mean, it is absurd that First Caribbean would have to get a land tax certificate before they can lend, a BRA tax certificate, before they can lend money to you or I. This is gone, or will be gone in the next few days, just like the last government. I can guarantee that this will not return. I can guarantee that this will not return, sir. But I hope that the people of Barbados will recognize that for the first time in a decade, they have an administration that recognizes that before we can just implement regimes, we have to pause and look and see if there's any downside. And this was not done, and notwithstanding the fact that we, as we were in the opposition, pointed out to them again and again and again that what they were doing was actually harming Barbados and Barbadians rather than benefiting anybody, they, as they've always done, turned a blind eye and a deaf ear. I commend the Minister for bringing this repeal bill. It may not have a lot of substance in terms of the number of words used, but it will have one hell of an impact on the Barbadian financial landscape. I congratulate you and commend this bill to the members of this chamber. I'm obliged.
The honourable member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill here before this honourable Parliament, and first wish to congratulate the new member for Christchurch East Central for laying his first bill and speaking and presenting. And of course, the honourable member for St. Michael South as well, who would have, South Central, who would have supported it, the new Minister of State in the Economic Affairs Ministry. This bill, of course, is yet another fulfillment of the promises made by this new government to the people of Barbados. As the Honourable Attorney General said, when this act was passed in the Parliament of Barbados, I believe the institution of the tax clearance certificate came in 2006. We spoke vehemently against its imposition. Remember, as the honourable member for St. Joseph said, he spoke, the honourable member for St. Michael's South East, the honourable Prime Minister spoke, and myself, all giving very practical reasons why this should not come into the laws of Barbados. The government completely ignored it. The then Minister of Finance, in his usual arrogant and contemptuous way and theatrics, really and truly worthy of an Oscar award, said, no way, we are bringing this in. An absolutely unpractical bill. And anyone involved in business of any type, commerce, the legal profession, at any kind of reasonable level would understand why this should never have taken place. But the imposition of the tax clearance certificate, Mr. Speaker, in fact, came in, or the attempted imposition came in 2 years before. It actually came in August 2014, when the Barbados Revenue Authority Director or Commissioner, by whatever name called, sought to impose the tax clearance certificate without any legislative basis. And that public officer could only have done that, of course, on instructions from a Minister of Finance, because public servants don't act, in that case, on their own whim and caprice. And there was no legal basis whatsoever. I remember, sir, that I, on behalf of this great political party, made a public statement saying that if the BRA didn't remove its attempt to impose tax clearance certificate on land transactions by the end of August, certainly we would have taken the BRA to court. The Bar Association followed shortly after, I remember, by making a statement on that, to that end, because there was no legal basis whatsoever. BRA was acting ultra vires. And this is something that departments of government have to be very mindful of. They can't act on their own whim and caprice because they wake up an official one morning, where there's a minister or otherwise, and says, I want this done. It has to come before the Parliament of Barbados, which is the legislative body. And there was absolutely no legal authority at that time for any revenue authority to impose a condition on recording of conveyances or mortgages on any land transaction that you had to produce proof that you had paid any other tax, whether it be income tax, VAT, your NIS,
whatever customs duties. There was no legal basis for it. And even though we told the then Minister of Finance that, I remember approaching him in this parliament and telling him that, he said, boy, he ain't worrying with that. And he instructed Brad to go ahead and do it. That month, sir, the land registry was at a standstill. In other words, the land registry collected very few dollars in property transfer tax that month. And the land registry collects tremendous amount of money in property transfer tax. And of course, concomitant with property transfer tax is stamp duty, as you know, sir, as an attorney at law. So the Barbados Government and Revenue Authority was deprived during a whole month period of both stamp duty and vendors' property transfer tax because of the obstinance of a political administration that did not understand how the business works in the world, how commerce works, and how legal effects and ultra-vires authority based on lack of financial knowledge and common sense could harm and hinder a country. Thankfully, as I said, BRA took a step back. I believe they got a legal opinion and which said that they were wrong. And so that the tax clearance certificate didn't come into effect in August 2014. But then the Minister of Finance, the then Minister of Finance, introduced the legislation for it, the amendment to the Barbados Revenue Authority Act to bring in the tax clearance certificate. If I recall, it was in 2016. It was wrong. It was poor financial judgment. Immediately, the banking institutions of this country said, well, we're suspending mortgages. We ain't lending any money for mortgages. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, and as the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, the top businessman that he is, understands fully and support to, land transactions are one of the basis of commercial enterprise in a country. The ability to mortgage your land, to buy and sell your land. And the banks issued a statement, the Banking Association, through its then president, that they were suspending loans and mortgages based on land. So again, the economy dries up, transactions dry up, people under real problems. At that time, you would recall, Mr. Speaker, of course, the government had just the year before, 2 years before, in fact, it came into effect in 2015, imposed tuition fees on Barbadians. So a Barbadian now, parent or grandparent, who wanted now to mortgage the property to get the thousands of dollars for the child now or grandchild to go to the University of the West Indies and further their education so that they could have the opportunity which should present itself to any Barbadian to go to the University of the West Indies now, had bare problems again getting a loan to send their child or grandchild to the University of the West Indies, or to any university for that matter. If your old mother or your child now come down with some health problem, which clearly the intransigeries of life could be set on any of us, and you need money now for an operation, whether locally or overseas, or for some medical services, as the Honourable Member for St. Philip North or Christchurch West would tell you, again, you're in problems. And your health now, your poor state of health not waiting on eternity. You need the money now, and you have to get now a tax clearance certificate to borrow money on your land for your mother or your child now to get medical treatment. By that time, they might be dead. I mean, it defied common sense on an administration made up of big men and big women who one would have thought had experiences in life, who would have told them that this cannot be working in the interests of the people of Barbados. We on this side well understand, Mr. Speaker, the need for a state
to collect taxes. So as the Honourable Attorney General emphasized, we are all in agreement that a state must collect taxes in order for the social services and the whole country to run. And we are not on any account supporting the non-payment of taxes. The taxes are there, they must be collected, but a tax must be a reasonable tax, because if it is unreasonable, people are not going to pay it anyway. There's going to be a large percentage of default. And it has to be reasonable. And this tax was wrong. And therefore, I am extremely humbled to be able to come today and support a parliamentary session where a bill is being presented to amend the BRA Act to remove the harsh imposition of a tax clearance certificate in order to record a conveyance, a mortgage, lease, whatever land transaction, even an assent, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch West so eloquently put forward an example. It might be a case you inherit land from your grandmother and you want to use that land to, for example, now start up a business. I mean, entrepreneurship, which is so important going forward in this country, as the Honourable Member, my colleague from St. George South clearly recognizes in his ministry, and you're hindered because you now can't show that you have been paying income taxes over a number of years. And you now want to legitimately advance in your life. So this tax, this requirement, this financial and legislative requirement was an absolute hindrance on ease of doing business in Barbados. And we fell, Mr. Speaker, or we, from number 72 in 2009 in terms of ease of doing business globally, right down to 2006, 2007. I don't think I heard any statistics for last year, but 2006 to number 139 out of 160 countries in the world in terms of ease of doing business. And that is one of the major problems that Barbados found itself in under the last Democratic Labour Party regime. That they had ministers who talked pretty about ease in doing business and nothing was done. It became harder and harder. Imposition of all kind of licenses and certificates to do normal business. You had to take off a whole day from your work to go and pay a driver's license of $50. Nonsense. And this was the myopic thinking of an administration that, thankfully, and I commend the people of Barbados for deciding that they didn't merit one single seat in this parliament. They did not understand the harsh effects of taxation. They imposed 40 new or increased taxes on the people of this country. Some were retroactive. And the normal principle, as the tax advisors and the lawyers in here, the Honourable Attorney General, for example, would know, is that you should not have retroactive taxation. But they didn't understand that, because when they brought in the municipal solid waste tax, which together with the National Social Responsibility levy, which this Parliament would again thankfully be moving to remove later in today's parliamentary session, when they brought in the municipal solid waste tax, the then member for St. Lucie said it was not retroactive. It was brought in March of a year, 2014. It would be. The Act stated clearly in it that it was applicable from September the 1st, the previous year, 2013. But yet, the then member for St. Lucie, who thankfully the people of Barbados will never have to bear at this level again, said it was not retroactive. He didn't even understand the word retroactive, and retroactivity of tax should not come in. So you know, when you had individuals of that
of that kind of thinking in a cabinet of Barbados, you could understand why a government would be so misguided on these issues that are so fundamental to the daily lives of the people of Barbados. As was said, there was no consultation, and this is one of the problems, that the previous government went about doing things on their own thinking. The then Prime Minister said he didn't need any group of eminent persons to advise him that, and he listed some people, including the then member of St. Lucie and the member for Christchurch, West Central, who thankfully is not in here anymore, as being part of the eminent persons of Barbados. So you could understand, when you compare that, the former member for Christchurch, West Central, as among group of eminent persons. So you could understand why they got into that warped thinking. This party, on the other hand, Mr. Speaker, has been consulting people from the time we lost the government. Well, we didn't win the government in 2013, rubbing shoulders, people's assemblies, knowing what, bringing people into our consultations and into our policies. So we understand fully well what is good and right for the people and what is not good and right. And we will continue to do that. That is why we were able, the Honourable Prime Minister, just 2 weeks after coming to that office, to bring a mini budget to help in the social and economic transformation of this country after the last 10 years. The principle has been stated of no taxation without representation. I believe it was the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, East Central, who spoke about that principle that has been with so-called free democracy since the 1700s. And this is a key factor, Mr. Speaker, and that is why I would want to diverse slightly, sir, with your permission, that again, when the previous government, just a couple months ago, sought to deprive people who, under the law of Barbados, had the right to vote as Commonwealth citizens residing here for 3 years, paying taxes like everybody else, it was wrong. Because you can't be paying taxes. You can't be paying taxes, living here in some cases for 30 years, like some of my constituents in Lower Carlton, for instance. And you're going to tell them that even though the law, the clear laws of Barbados say that you have the right to vote as a Commonwealth citizen, as a St. Lucian Vincentian, that you can't vote, and you go into the CCJ, and then you're talking, as the last Prime Minister said, about removing the Barbados from the Caribbean Court of Justice because it has given a decision which you don't like. I mean, we are well rid, the people of Barbados, of this government. We now, sir, have, yes, the Honourable Prime Minister found that this Parliament had to increase, at least in the mini budget, and this Parliament voted for it, to increase the highest tax band to 40%, you know, to try to catch more people and for those who can afford to pay taxes to so pay those taxes. The 40%, though, the highest tax rate now in terms of income tax, is still below what it was under a Democratic Labour Party regime in the early 1970s, when it was 50% at the highest tax rate. The whole focus there, Mr. Speaker, is, as has been said in this debate earlier today, that people who can afford to pay should pay. And we try to ease those who are most vulnerable in society, those old persons, those mothers with 5, 6 children, those persons with disabilities. We try to ease them as much as possible from the system of taxation. And that is something I support. As the Honourable Attorney General said, and that Honourable member pointed out ways in which the Barbados Revenue Authority can collect the valid land taxes, can seek to maximize
their collection of taxes, because a state or revenue authority will never collect from everybody all the taxes due, but at least you have to try to maximize them. And that honourable member spoke about ways registering judgment. There were many ways that the then government could have gone about seeking to collect, to ensure a higher tax take from those persons who should be paying taxes than by instituting a tax clearance certificate. But we surely, Mr. Speaker, as a cabinet, as a parliament, will support any support that the Barbados Revenue Authority may reasonably need to be able to collect the taxes that are due to gain the human and technical resources, computer technological resources as well, to collect taxes from those who should be paying, because yes, we know that there are many people who are out of the tax net who should be paying taxes. And it can be that the burden falls on those people who are pay-as-you-earn people, the public servants of Barbados whose income tax comes out before they get their check. It has to fall as well, the tax burden, on self-employed people, and they have to understand, sir, that we all are in this together and we all have to share equitably and fairly in the payment of taxes in this country, because it all goes towards a common good. I mean, after all, sir, the taxes that were announced last week will now cause, again, thousands of young Barbadians to go to the University of the West Indies. Again, will cause some roads to be repaired, will cause some garbage trucks to be bought, will cause some transport board buses to be purchased, will cause the accident and emergency unit to receive an input to become more efficient, as my colleague, the honourable member for the city, spoke so eloquently on last week, Friday. So we urge in here, we take the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to urge Barbadians to pay their fair share of taxes. And, you know, one way, Mr. Speaker, before I sit down, I would wish to reiterate what the Honourable Attorney General said in terms of taxing officers, in terms of national insurance officers, being more diligent in terms of going to self-employed persons and professionals and look at their books. They have that authority under the law. The impression I get is that they do not use that authority, that legal authority, as much as they should. Yes, the Honourable Attorney General spoke about when he was a younger lawyer and NIS came to him. I remember income tax coming to me when I was a younger lawyer too. That I don't hear about that these days. And I believe that the Barbados Revenue Authority may very well have a very fertile territory in going and examining the books of some of these beneficiaries of the fatted calf under the last government. These attorneys at law who got millions of dollars in legal fees, exorbitant legal fees, charging 6 and 8 and 10 times what they should have charged. That is fertile territory. Yes. Go and examine their books. Yes, ma'am. I would like to know, as a member of this parliament and a member of cabinet, whether they have paid the adequate amount of taxes on their $5.8 million legal fees that they charged for Cahill, and on the $1.4 million charged to the Barbados Water Authority that the Honourable member for Christchurch East now struggling with and doing a fine job in the 3 weeks that he's been a minister, battling.
And the VAT on it too.
And the VAT too. Because as the good businessman, the Honourable member for Christchurch West has reminded me, the VAT too, whether they have paid the requisite amount of taxes on the 5.8, the 1.4s, the millions plus, the 750,000s, all for reading 2 documents, signing 3, attending 2 meetings. Whether they have paid their taxes, it can't be consumptuous living, as the Honourable Attorney General said, driving about Mercedes, living in big mansions and castles. They have to pay their fair share, the contractors, the construction people, although that is behind the court, the cloth of a company, whether that they're still earning a salary from the company, whether they have paid the requisite amount of taxes, whether duties have been paid on a Mercedes-Benz just before election that came into the port to go to Hyatt, that is non-existent. Nothing happening. Court injunction on it.
Honourable
But yet
member has
people...
5 minutes.
Pardon, sir?
The honourable member has 5 more minutes.
Thank you, sir. I'll be finished before that. But still, Mercedes-Benz stopping the line car coming in without paying the requisite amount of duties for a non-existent project. Why can't we collect the taxes now, the duties on it? All of this has helped deprive Barbados of a revenue base, whereby we are now the third most indebted country in the world, and where we know that we, in this party, with the help of the people of Barbados and the Lord Almighty, will bring this country back to its rightful place in CARICOM and in small developing countries and in the globe on the whole. But where, under the last 10 years of Democratic Labour Party rule, we were down at the bottom of the social and economic pit of countries, the laughing stock now of all the countries in the Caribbean and in the world. So BRA needs to do its job in terms of collecting taxes from those persons who were beneficiaries of the largest, the fatted calf, as the late Prime Minister called it, dished out by the Democratic Labour Party among its members and supporters and shareholders to the detriment of the people of Barbados. And we will certainly support BRA in that effort, not only for those persons who might have been beneficiaries of malfeasance and abuse of public office, but also for all Barbadians. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr.
The
Speaker.
honourable member for St. Michael's Office.
I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 1:45 p.m.
The question is that this honourable be suspended until 1:45 p.m. All those honourable members, please say aye. All those honourable members against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honourable House is suspended until 1:45 p.m.